Star Wars is a spiritual successor to the rather prestigious Homeworld franchise, but where Homeworld is focused on large intergalactic events, Star Wars instead focuses on the trials and tribulations of a small mercenary company trying to survive and thrive in a turbulent galaxy. I'm sure you've read the video title, and yes, I do think this game is better than Homeworld 3. In fact, I think my opinion on this game might be a little controversial. So let's go through the gameplay, story, and then I'll give those controversial thoughts. But before we get into gameplay, let's talk a little bit about the technical side of things. This game, being quite old, of course, has technical problems. When I first tried the game, my mouse lagged to the point where it felt like moving my mouse through sand would be as I described it. Luckily, just installing an earlier version of DirectX fixes that. The second problem is quite rather funny. Your bullets tend to hang in the air, kind of like Chinese lanterns, which means no one can really shoot each other because the bullets are just suspended in space. Luckily, this was also solved by running the game as administrator and in compatibility mode with Windows 98 and /ME. I also made some minor adjustments, that being increasing the resolution and the draw distance of the game. Outside of that, this game was played completely vanilla, with no modifications or anything other than the ones I've already listed. I will say I did experience around 5 crashes in the game. Some of them seem to be totally random, but 3 of them, I think, were the cause of a specific event in the game. That being, I ordered my ship troops to follow a ship, and then that ship died in a cutscene. But because they are following it, it caused the game to crash. So I solved that by simply not following the ship that then died in the cutscene. Anyway, now that all out of the way, let's move on to gameplay. This game doesn't have a strategic layer, so we don't have to waste time talking about that. But what it does have is a hub menu, which you visit before and after every mission. Here you can level up your wolves, change up their equipment and the equipment of your mothership, and buy new stuff. You can also read the news and then pick which mission you want to go on next. Unlike Homeworld, this game puts a big emphasis on your pilots and their skills and loadouts. Since you have a maximum of 6 pilots, making sure they are using the ships and weapons that complement their skills is important, as this is quite a hard game. When you start the game, you begin with some of the best first-tier ships, which are some of the worst ships in the game. But luckily, the low-level pirates you fight in the early game have even worse equipment, so we can make do. You start with so little money that you can't go out and buy good ships and guns early. You have to make do with what you can scavenge or steal. The ships you destroy often leave behind components, which your mothership can then suck up, and then you can then use or sell those components at your hub. You can even loot ships that weren't destroyed by you, making it a good idea to swoop in on battlefields and nab whatever you can find. There are 16 ships you can use in the game, and even more that you can't use, like aliens or berserk craft, as well as larger capital ships. Unfortunately, we spend the whole game with our Star Wolf mothership and never have the option to switch out to a bigger and better ship. Let's take a look at ships in details. Ships are broken up into a few types, those being ships with large guns, ships with small guns, ships with a lot of missile slots, and ships with lots of system slots. Large guns are usually high damage but slow firing lasers, whereas small guns are high firing but low damage kinetic weapons. Both have their use, as lasers are good at sniping enemy ships straight out of the air, while kinetic weapons are good against larger capital ships which can't avoid their barrage of bullets. Personally, I try to keep a balanced force, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that I liked big guns the best. There's just something very cathartic about just killing enemy ships in a single shot of a high-powered laser. Missiles are a little different to other weapons, as they are finite, and once you run out, your only option is to go without, or dock at your mothership in order to resupply. Personally, I'm not a big fan of missiles, but they can be incredibly powerful, especially when used by the member of your crew with the missiles skill tree. Missiles are even better than small guns at dealing with larger capital ships. Their main weakness is that they can be intercepted by missile defense systems. When it comes to systems, there's a lot of different ones. Active and passive missile defense, as I mentioned, but also speed boosters, shield boosters, long-range scanners, emergency repair systems or active repair systems, even weapon amplifiers and stealth systems. When it comes to actual gameplay, you can't produce units in level like Homeworld. Instead, you have your mothership and your crew, and occasionally allies to help you. For example, in some levels, the local police force called the Patrol might help you with pirate attacks. All the levels in this game are handcrafted. There are no procedurally generated levels here. Many levels also have side quests or alternate ways of going about them. In some levels, you might even have the option of betraying your employer, or backing out of a contract entirely, if your moral compass prevents you from attacking civilian targets, for example. I feel this game does a really good job of fleshing out the various factions in this game, not just in different colours for their ships, but also in how they behave. Pirates, for example, often have a hodgepodge of different weapons and ships with no real concerted design, whereas the corporations often have the highest level tech and the highest level ships, but tend to lack the piloting skill of other factions. And the patrol and the military have more conventional forces with consistent doctrines of their ships. This helps really flesh out the game and make the factions feel alive. You'll see a certain faction attacking you and you'll be like, oh, they have these kinds of ships and they use these kinds of weapons. I know how to handle those. Or you'll see ships and factions, for example, that use lots of missiles. You're like, okay, I need to make sure my missile systems are ready because they're about to barrage us. It really is nice having all these factions kind of behave differently and use different weapons and ships. It would be very easy for all the factions to start to feel the same if they were consistently using the same weapons, which is something I do think the Homeworld games suffer from. In every level, you fight largely the same sort of enemies as before. But in this game, you start off fighting the pirates in the first act, as it were. And in the second act, you start engaging more with the berserks and corporations as you start getting hired by them to attack their rivals. And then in the later half of the game, you start to get involved with the military and the alien ships, who all have different weaponry and different styles of fighting, which makes everyone interesting to fight. Or maybe it'd be better to say dread to fight, as some of the enemies late game can be quite brutal, shall we say, which makes it all the more important to keep a handle on both your equipment and the skills of your pilots. For example, later on in the game, some of the skills you get can allow you to summon allied troops, freeze enemies in space, or completely remove their shields, or even boost your shields entirely. There's also other skills that passively increase the accuracy of your pilots with their weapons, as well as their ability to avoid being shot. In this game, there is only really a few kinds of honing weapons, those being missiles, and they can be countered via air missile defense systems. So good piloting skill that allows in order to dodge enemy shots is really important, as well as good accuracy to actually hit the enemy who will try and dodge the same as you will. Overall, I think the gameplay here is really good, even despite the game's age. It definitely feels very well made. Even though the levels are rather linear and the game's rather linear, there are alternate ways to go about many levels. There's also some mutually exclusive levels where you have a choice between two contracts where you're playing from either side, essentially. And there are 2 routes in the game, although they are rather short, each route being around 2 to 3 missions and only happen at the very end of the game-ish. So I do think there is some replay value, even if the game is rather linear, as I said. Especially as, for example, you wanted to do a playthrough where you very much leaned into the more piratey aspects of being a mercenary and just wanted to attack civilians wherever possible and not really work with the patrol or the military. When it comes to being a competitor to Homeworld, I would say the story in this game is quite weak when compared to Homeworld. It's not very dramatic, it's not really over the top, but it's actually a kind of more localized and personal story about a group of mercenaries in the intergalactic situation they find themselves in, which of course doesn't have the emotional impact of what happens in Homeworld, for example, with Karak being destroyed and the migration of the Kushan to Higara. When it comes to gameplay, though, I actually do think I might prefer this game to a lot of the Homeworlds, but I'll get to that much later on in the video. For now, let's move on to this game's story and plot. When we first start the game up, we're greeted by an intro which shows our protagonist, as it were, piloting a transport ship and being attacked by pirates. He survives this encounter, though he loses his ship. His friend then invites him to form a mercenary company with him. And so the Star Wolves are born. When we start a new game, we're then greeted by another cutscene of our 2 heroes at the bar drinking some strange blue liquid, when a ne'er-do-well, being chased by the police, shows up, steals our friend's ship, transfers into it at a very quick rate, I might say, and then flies away. And that explains why we start off with some of the worst ships in the game, when we could have started off with one of the better ones. Oh well. The first few missions in this game are rather simple story-wise. We're just starting out doing basic patrol missions, doing basic escort missions, because at this point we're not really at a point where anyone's willing to trust us with a bigger job. The first big story mission we do is the hunt for the Red Corsair, who is a noteworthy pirate who's been plaguing the area recently. He's also the one who shot down our protagonist's ship in the beginning, but I don't think anyone ever notices or mentions this. The protagonist never hailed the Red Corsair when he was attacked by him, so he might just be unaware. And the Red Corsair, he's probably killed billions of ships at this point. He probably doesn't remember every single one or who's piloting it. But I said no one seems to mention this, so oh well. When we capture the Red Corsair, we actually have a choice. We can either take him on as a member of our crew or hand him over to the authorities for a large sum of credits. Either option is viable. It's nice getting another character so early on in the game, but the large sum of credits could also be invested into better ships and weapons. Personally, I prefer taking the Red Corsair just because, he's kind of our guy. He also gives us access to a few quests that we wouldn't ordinarily have access to, as he reveals various stashes that we can raid, as it were. He's also quite a nice guy, but despite being a pirate, and he stays with us the whole campaign, never betrays us, which is rather surprising considering he is, a pirate. After that, we really enter the mid-game and start getting introduced to the corporations. These three large corporations essentially control the galaxy outside of the area directly under the Empire's control. They are the Triad, the USS, and INCO, or maybe INOCO. You also start fighting the Berserks in a much major way in this part of the game. The Berserks are a sort of AI-controlled faction that is implied to just have been escaped from a lab made of one of the corporations and is now just wreaking havoc. No one really seems that bothered by their presence, other than, the fact they kill everyone they encounter. But we end up doing a lot of missions related to them as part of the story, as, a lot of people want protection from them or to fight them. When we get introduced to the corporation and start working for them in detail, we really start to learn how this empire functions. Even a faction like the pirates, who you would think are mainly just bandits, has a place in this system. Mainly, the corporations and even the empire itself use the pirates as false flaggers, essentially, to justify their actions. They often also hire them to carry out attacks on their rivals. There's a few missions where you act with the support of pirates who are there to provide cover for your actions. To give you an example, there's a part where the pirates attack a ship that you're trying to destroy and they lure away the guards, so you then move in and destroy it. And if you then read the news, it's reported that the ship was attacked by pirates. That's something else of note. In the news, your actions are usually not recorded as being yours. For example, there's a few times in the story where you'll do something of note, such as defeating Red Corsair, and then you'll read the news and it'll be like, Navy claims credit for defeating the Red Corsair. You as an individual rarely get mentioned, and your actions, usually other people just take credit for them, which is to be expected as a mercenary, right? Although people do seem to acknowledge outside of the news that you are, the famous Star Wars who've done X, Y, Z. This take on things is a rather realistic way of portraying mercenaries, because in real life, most people would just take credit for hiring the mercenaries and their actions. They wouldn't really credit the mercenaries themselves for what they've done. The second big mission of note story-wise is a mission to supply a sector that has been completely blockaded. The local corporation, the Triads, has essentially bribed both the pirates and the local police force to ignore / raid the system, meaning it's cut off and is currently starving. We take on the mission to supply this sector and have to fight off pirates and Triad attacks while the patrol stands by and basically ignores our plight. It is possible through dialogue to try and convince the patrol captain to actually send you some escort, but what that really causes is you'll be safe part of the way, but when the escort turns back, suddenly you'll be on your own. Once we get into the sector that's been blockaded, they inform us that the Triad has been attacking them repeatedly and has been blockaded them because they refuse to sell the system to them. They, of course, are acting like an independent corporation where every member has shares in this local independent system and receives the dividends from it. Either way, we supply them with the supplies we've brought through. We also destroy the local Triad system because, bad people deserve to be blown up. And then we gain the fourth member of our motley band, one Astra. She is quite a unique character as her skill tree is based around luck. A lot of her skills have the ability to decrease the chance of getting hit, or making it so if you do get hit, there's like a 25% chance that the hits do no damage, which is of course very useful. She also has the ability to unlock evil luck, which allows her to freeze enemies in space so they simply can't act. Either way, she's a nice addition to our team if she's a little weak when it comes to direct combat. The local systems also give us some shares for their corporation, which causes us to gain dividends every level. We can also directly sell the shares for a lump sum of money if we wanted to. Personally, I kept the shares the whole time. We should support local businesses after all. Funnily enough, the Triad doesn't really take offense to us getting in their way in this manner. They'll immediately hire us for other jobs. I suppose everything's fair when it comes to mercenary work. No one seems to be that bothered about you backstabbing or betraying or doing actions against them. I suppose since the conflict is so large and taking place across the galaxy that they can't really afford to seethe because one mercenary band got in their way one time, and they're more than willing to pay you to do other work for them. We also get another mission in this stage of the game to help a guy called Heretic, who turns out to be the ne'er-do-well who stole our friend's ship in the beginning of the game. He, of course, offers to return it to us, but when we find it, it gets blown up by some pirates who found it. No ship for us, I guess. In order to compensate us, Heretic agrees to join our team, giving us our 5th member. And this is where I'm going to call the spoiler warning. I doubt anybody really cares about spoilers for this game, but if you've been so enamored with it you yourself want to play it, now would be a good time to stop listening, as I'm going to now spoil this game. I'll of course provide links to the next chapter where I stop talking about spoilers, and I'll of course warn you by saying this chapter is the spoiler chapter, so be aware. If you want to avoid spoilers, now is the time to skip ahead, as I will now spoil most of this game's plot, but I'll leave out a few minor aspects, I suppose. The epic finale of the second act is a large-scale attack on the Berserks, who've been plaguing the sector. In this mission, we actually get to recruit a 6th member. She actually has a unique ability to summon allied ships directly into battle to help us. This is nice because the allied ships of course fight the enemies, and if they die, we can loot their equipment, which is extra nice. Either way, with her help, we destroy the mainframe of the Berserks, supposedly destroying them entirely. I suppose we'll see in time. After that, EI decides to hang around with us for a bit because she no longer has an objective after the defeat of the Berserks. Once again, the news reports that the Navy carried out a major attack on the Berserks and destroyed them, and the Berserks seems to have disappeared in general. After that, we enter our 3rd act, as it were. This is where things start to really hit ahead when it comes to gameplay. All of the best ships are being deployed by our enemies. We have access to a lot of the best ships and weapons, and it's really going to be the skill of our pilots that carry us through these levels. And we're going to need it because in this chapter, as it were, we get introduced to perhaps the strongest enemy in the game, the aliens. The Empire essentially just goes to war with this new alien faction we've discovered on our borders, and we have to fight them a lot. They use a lot of very powerful weapons, such as missiles that add corrosive effects to your ships and just destroy them over time, having repair systems aboard your ships very important, as well as anti-missile systems to intercept those missiles. It's also around this time that Heretic will quit our team, meaning that we'll be down a member for a little bit. His main reasoning for quitting is that we've become too popular and he doesn't like the attention. Although if you never recruit Red Corsair, I believe Heretic will stay with you permanently, so that's something to be aware of. Personally, I think Heretic isn't as good as Red Corsair. In general, he doesn't really have that many unique or interesting skills, so I prefer to keep Red Corsair and have Heretic leave later on. EI will also quit our team very soon after this, after we make contact with a scientist called Phantom. Luckily, Phantom will replace EI in our team, meaning we won't be down too far in numbers. Not long after that, we'll recruit Viper, the final member of our team. Viper, being a member of the military, has a unique ability to summon military ships to help us, which is very useful, but Phantom is the real interesting character here when it comes to gameplay mechanics. He has the ability, once unlocked, to flat out remove an enemy's shields, or to restore ours, which is very useful when our mothership's taking a lot of damage and the enemy removes the shields. We can just reapply them over and over again, essentially, as long as we have uses of the ability, which makes a lot of the late fights a lot easier. Once we have these 2 new characters, we essentially enter the end game. Here we start to get missions that are largely, well, not mutually exclusive, but there's a finite amount of them and you cannot do all of them in a single playthrough. After a certain point, you'll reach the climactic decision moment, as it were. Some of these missions are quite interesting, though. For example, we can help a ship called the Stalingrad fight the aliens, and we find an alien portal, and he decides to fly straight through. Good luck on the other side, I guess. You literally don't know where you're going or where you're going to end up. but I respect the maneuver. We also have another mission that requires us to actually capture enemy ships by luring them into a pulse field which renders them inert. We can then capture those ships. Unfortunately, we can't use them, but we can sell them, and they're worth quite a lot of money, which makes this a level where we can gain quite a large sum of credits. We also have a mission where we can engage directly in a major battle with the aliens and fight an enemy flagship together with the Stalingrad. Stalingrad will reduce itself to half, and then the aliens will retreat, and we'll be tasked with finishing it off, which isn't that hard, honestly. At least it wasn't for me. But after a certain point, we'll reach the decision moment, the level SOS, where we'll arrive to find the corporations on one side and the military on the other. The military will demand the submission of the corporations and saying that everyone must come together to defy the alien threat. The corporations will declare that they have no desire to serve the Empire, and they'll actually blame the Empire for the war with the aliens. Either way, both sides will look to you and ask you to join them. You can either side with the Empire and fight the corporations, or side with the corporations and fight the Empire. This leads to two rather different sets of scenarios. If we side with the Empire, we get commissioned to go through a portal and find a strange alien weapon that we will use to defeat the aliens. And if we decide to side with the corporations, instead of going through that portal to find the alien artifact, we'll instead wait on the exit of the portal and ambush the Imperial forces once they've gathered it and come back through. The real difference between these routes is how each faction behaves towards you, I suppose. If you go the Imperial route, then the Empire will reward you for your deeds, essentially, and make you an admiral in the Imperial Navy. Whereas if you go the corporation route, they will essentially try to murder you once you gather the artifact, and you'll be forced to flee to the only sector of space that is still friendly to us, that independent sector that we helped earlier in game. Also, in both routes, EI will come back and try to steal the weapon, and we'll have to deal with her by essentially destroying the sun in the sector using that weapon. How horrible. Either way, neither ending really blew me away, but they made sense. We didn't really decide the conflict. We essentially got our hands on an alien artifact and ran away with it in one ending, or handed it over to the government in the other, and then gained high status. Which feels really thematic, because, we are a small mercenary group. The best we could get, I suppose, is being able to join the military as a mercenary, as an admiral, or fleeing into the only sectors of space that are not hostile to us in the corporate route. Makes a lot of sense. We don't really decide the fate of the galaxy or anything. If the Empire gets their hands on that new space weapon, it's implied they'll use it to bring the corporations to heel, but I'm not sure how effective that will be in the long run, as the corporations directly control a lot of the Empire and hold a lot of influence, and the precursor ship is essentially just one ship. And who knows what the corporations will do in the back via espionage to solve the ship problem. There's also, of course, the war with the aliens, which is still ongoing. In the independence route, it's implied the Empire falls into chaos with it and being divided into civil war, which is honestly the least we could expect. Both endings, I think, are okay. Neither, as I said, blew me away, but they make a lot of sense. There is one problem, though. Neither of these endings are actually canon. Gasp. In fact, there is a mod for this game called Emperor's Legacy, which has the canon ending in that the developers liked so much that they made the ending of that mod canon. Unfortunately, that mod is only in Russian, so I was not able to play it. And I'm hesitant about playing mods in general for videos that I record, as I want to just play the main game as it is. But either way, since neither of these endings are canon, it does leave a bad taste in the mouth, as it were, when it comes to whether these endings are good or bad, or which one you prefer, because that makes it largely irrelevant. Oh well. I suppose we'll come to talk about the canon ending when I eventually get to doing the sequels. For now, let's move on to the positives and negatives about this game and my final conclusions, which, as I mentioned earlier, it might be a little controversial. To start with, on the positive front, I think this game does a really good job of modelling being a mercenary band, taking contracts, flying around space, doing what you've been contracted to do, and occasionally picking up side quests and side missions from people willing to pay the price for your services. It's a really good representation of being a mercenary, I think. Unlike Homeworld, this game is a lot smaller in scale, but I think it does a really good job making you feel like you're a part of a larger galaxy. All the other factions have their own ships and colours. You have your own small crew and ships that you use. Your crew actually feels a lot like characters because there's so few of them and they have unique abilities. that it really helps them stand out, as opposed to the generic ships we just get in Homeworld who all largely have the same abilities. You can have two characters in the exact same ship with the exact same sets of equipment, but they'll perform differently because each one will be better with certain kinds of equipment. For example, our second character, Ace, is best with lasers and has high piloting skill, but low skill with electronic systems. So when placed in a ship with a lot of electronics, he's going to perform worse than somebody like Astra, who's very good with electronics, or Phantom, and has lots of skills related to them. And if you give him something that isn't a laser, he's of course going to perform worse than if he had a laser weapon, which helps make these people feel like real characters, with their own strengths. As I mentioned, every faction having their own colours and equipment that they like to use really helps them feel fleshed out and not just generic enemies. That's one thing I think Homeworld does suffer from a lot. Everyone essentially uses the same sort of equipment, same sort of ships, and it makes everyone feel rather generic. Homeworld also was very weak when it came to fleshing out factions outside the Higarans, whereas this game does a really good job at really showing us each of the factions and how they act in the galaxy. Even when it's really minor things, like Inoko rarely hires mercenaries, so there's very few jobs we get from them. Those help flesh out the factions and give us an idea of their inner workings. Or, for example, the military often claiming credits for our own victories. That really gives us an insight into how the military functions, how many of their other victories are them taking credit for other people's work. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, even minor factions like the pirates play a role in the universe, that being used for assassinations and false flag attacks. It really does feel like everyone has a place in the universe, which really is really nice, honestly. And again, somewhere where I think Homeworld suffers, it feels like all the other factions in Homeworld, outside maybe the Taidani, have very little characterization. Now, let's move on to the negatives, and there are a few. I would say battles feel quite random, unfortunately, due to the way ship combat works, that being largely based around percentages to hit, accuracy, percentages to dodge. This can lead to you being in scenarios where you fight the same battle multiple times, and it turns out differently every time because of random chance, essentially. This is definitely a game where you're going to do a lot of saving and reloading, simply because you'll go into a fight, they'll kill all of your people, and then you'll reload the same fight, do exactly the same, and you'll kill all of them with no casualties. So I do think if you're concerned about randomness, that's definitely a major downside. You can't really plan for every eventuality because of the amount of randomness. So you can mitigate it by having good skills, having good equipment, and stuff like that. For example, in the late game, where I had pretty much the best equipment in the game, I pretty much never lost any fighters at any point, outside of some rare circumstances. The voice acting in this game is largely non-existent, and the voice acting that is there is pretty bad. I'll show you some now so you can hear for yourself, but it's honestly not very good.
Affirmative. Launch completed. What?
You're doing it already?
Weapons ready.
My main problem actually is that there's not much of it. I would have, even though it's quite bad, I would have liked a lot of the lines in the game to have been voice acted, because sure, they would be bad, but they'd be pretty memorable, right? That would be nice. But then I'm quite resistant to bad voice acting due to growing up playing lots of, Eastern games, shall we say. I'm sure everyone remembers Dynasty Warriors with the feel the power of my magic. So yeah, I quite like bad voice acting, so my opinion here doesn't reflect everybody else's. There was also one point when I missed a level because I essentially reached the cutoff point and the game doesn't actually inform you, which can be quite annoying. As I said, I reached the cutoff point, did that cutoff point level, and every level before that I hadn't finished was essentially lost, and I wasn't able to play them unless I'd reloaded and I decided to just stick with it. But, it would have been nice to have some sort of notification on when you're reaching the cutoff point between chapters, as it were, because the game gives no indication of which act or chapter you're in. That's why I largely use different words for them each time in this video, because I'm not really sure what to call them. Because they are different, just because there's different missions in each act, there's different equipment that you can use, different ships you can buy. So it is important to differentiate them, but unfortunately the game does nothing to differentiate them. One final minor negative is it would have been really nice to customize our ships. Since we often loot ships from other factions, it means we fly around with a lot of our ships bearing the markings of those factions. It would have been nice if we could customize our ships to have a consistent color scheme or loadout. Maybe a cool icon and logo for the Star Wolves or something. Because I said it does feel quite weird that we're flying around in stolen ships bearing the markings of the factions we stole them from. when we could have our own unique art style for our ships, which is something that the Star Wars probably would do given the circumstances. To conclude this video, do I think this game's worth it? Yeah, actually, I really do. Considering the price for this game, full price on Steam right now, is only £3.40 or $4, and the cheapest it goes down to is 55 pence or 80 cents. This game is also available on GOG, so there's really no excuse if you have any interest in playing this to not buy it and play it, because it's so cheap. It's quite a long experience. My one playthrough that I did for this video took me around 15 hours, but I had prior experience with the game and the franchise. My original playthrough that I played a few years ago when I first tried this game took me nearly 24 hours, so it's quite a lengthy game if you're not, of course, experienced with it in my case. But even if you are, like me, it still took me 15 hours, which is quite a while for a £3 or £4 or even 50 pence game. I think if you can get past the bugs and the age of the game, and if you have any interest in these sort of space games, then I really recommend it, honestly. But if you're someone who maybe wants a more refined, modern experience, then this game, of course, being 21 years old, this probably isn't the sort of experience you'll be looking for. But if you're like me and love playing older games because that's where all the soul is, then this game is definitely a thumbs up from me. It's really a pity we haven't really received any modern games like this. Unfortunately, the company that made this game is now defunct and no longer exists at the time of making this video, and nothing's been done with the Star Wars franchise since like 2007 or 8 maybe, so we're unlikely to get a modern sequel, but I'd be really interested in one, honestly, as I think this game really blends the open world 3D combat of Homeworld with a more rigid mercenary system with customizable units and characters that I think is unfortunately underutilized. And we don't really get many mercenary games in general, or games where we play as mercenary companies, and we get even fewer in space. So come on, somebody make a game like this. I'll give you money, I swear. But to get really controversial, I will actually say this game, to me, is better than Homeworld 3, it's better than Homeworld 2, it might even be better than Homeworld 1, although I will say I think Cataclysm is better than this game, simply because I think the story's a lot better in that game. But that's just me. As I said, this is surely a controversial opinion. I'm sure nobody else will agree with me. But that's just my honest opinion, having played this game, having played the Homeworld franchise. It's hard for me to really say that I prefer Homeworld 1. I really, really enjoy the mercenary-style gameplay here and playing as a more smaller, focused faction instead of having this large, dramatic story. But again, that's just me. I'm sure you'll disagree. And feel free to disagree in the comments. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts, and I'll be even interested to share my own as why I prefer this game. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Have you played Star Wars or any of the other Star Wars games? I'd love to hear your thoughts on them, as I quite like these games, even 2, which I'm sure everyone hates. I did really enjoy my time with this game, and I will be making reviews of its sequels in the future, although my opinions on those are maybe not as nice as my opinions on this game. Remember to like, favourite, subscribe, follow me on MySpace and other such sites. And for our next video, I do think it's time for another mod review. Of course, this review will be for Europe Size 4 mod. It's a name I can't pronounce, so I won't really give any hints, but you have that to look forward to, I guess. Thank you, and see you next time.